Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. I am Simply G, and today I'm going to be giving my first impressions, my thoughts on Magus of the Library by Mitsu Izumi. This is an ongoing series, started in 2017 and is currently published in Good Afternoon magazine, licensed by Kodansha, with 3 volumes in print as of right now, although 4 is set to be released very, very soon. And this is an adventure fantasy seinen. This is a really sweet series about one young boy's love of books and reading and his dream to become a librarian. So this story follows Theo, who's our main character on the cover here, who as a child was quite ostracized from his home village. The only person who really cared much for him was his adoptive sister, and so this is set in sort of a Arabian, kind of Middle Eastern setting, and Theo very obviously looks very different from the people around him. He's very fair, he's got pointed ears, green eyes, blonde hair, whereas the people around him are quite dark. His only friend is the daughter of the local librarian, librarian or library owner, who doesn't allow Theo to come. The father doesn't allow him to come into the library to borrow books because he's afraid he'll steal them or make them dirty or something, because he's poor and, poor people shouldn't be allowed to read. But through events in this book, he soon gains the good graces of the people around him, whilst he's also introduced to a group of Kafka, who are the librarians of this world, because this is sort of a fantasy setting. It's not it's not a historically accurate representation here. We have fantasy races. So Theo meets Kafka, who's traveling from sort of the central library, the main library branch, and shows him or tells him that he is allowed to read and should be able to experience the worlds that he wants to, and that he has great potential, and thus it encourages Theo to want to become a Kafka himself when he is able to do so, when he comes of age. So I've read the 3 volumes of this series so far. This isn't quite a first impressions, but I will say that this first volume is very self-contained. The entirety of this volume is Theo's early life, when he's about 6 or 7 years old, and his whole initial interaction with the Kafka and his struggles in the town that he's grown up with, and his friendship with his one friend and then his sister, and how things change for him in this short period. And with the expectations and a hope that he will be able to follow his dreams and read as many books as he wants and become a librarian as he so chooses. Later volumes we see him older, going to take the librarian test and the various things that he learns and discovers and experiences whilst doing so. This series was definitely one that I think was under a lot of people's radar, or off their radar entirely. When it was licensed, I didn't know anything about it. Didn't seem to be any information about it online. And even in of itself, it says it's based on a book by Sophie Schwim, which isn't actually a book that exists. So there's a lot of mysterious elements to this series, and I don't know if it's coincidental that when it was licensed there was no information online about it. It just seems like a little bit of magic in itself. But yes, I knew that I'd wanted to try it because, one, the covers are beautiful, and It's just seemed interesting. I like stories about books and librarians and those who love books, those who love reading, and so I thought this would be interesting. And I didn't realize that I would fall in love with the series, and that it would, in later subsequent volumes, how cool this fantasy world is. Obviously, as I said, it has sort of a Arabian, Middle Eastern sort of setting. I will say that because of fantasy racism, and I very often find that fantasy racism just doesn't work very well, especially when racism is a thing that exists in real life, and very often, I mean, obviously, the victims of racism are people of color, and the fact that the character in this series, or at least the first volume of this series, who's having all this bigotry put upon him, is just like white, fair skin, fair eyes, and all of the bigoted people around him are brown, is not great. Like, it's doesn't feel too I mean, it's definitely problematic, but it's also a small part of the story. I mean, the bigotry against Theo isn't forgotten, but it is, when we do get into later volumes, we're introduced to more of these fantasy races, and it's not like he's the only white person around, but the humans in the story, majority are brown, black, like people of color, whereas the fantasy races tend to be fairer skinned, or not even human-esque, for some of them. Well, humanoid, but not quite the same as quote unquote normal human. But it's not so much that Theo is, well, it might have been that he didn't look like everyone else when he was in the village, that people, that the townsfolk didn't like him, but later he's seen as more of an anomaly, because he's sort of one of the last, if not the last, of his race, like his people, which are kind of implied to be elves. It's not a super duper mystery. It hasn't been revealed, but shock horror, like, it's not hard to figure out. And it's implied that elves in years past were slaughtered through genocide, through war, and any remaining members have secluded themselves away from the rest of society. And Theo, as I guess he's half elf, half human, assumedly. We don't actually know, because his background is still a mystery, but he's not someone that you see every day walking around in the street, and he kind of recognizes that later when he's in the big city, because he thought that he'd just like blend into the crowd there, because there are so many other different people, different races, and different like cultures interacting, but then how much more he feels he stands out, because there is literally no one else like him around. It's interesting. Again, fantasy racism has its problems, and it can be very hit or miss, but I do think that it's not like egregiously bad. It's not offensive in any way, and I do think it, aside from that, the larger story, the mystery about what's going on, and this beautiful world that these characters inhabit, and just the love of reading, the understanding of reading, is just done super duper well, that I can't really get too upset with it, and that's just my biases coming out, of course. Yeah, this is a beautifully drawn series as well. I don't know how nobody had heard about this series. It's so beautiful. The art is so detailed. The world feels really rich, and I just love jumping into the story whenever we have a new volume. Definitely give it a shot, especially if you like sort of low fantasy settings, if you like series about books and reading. It has somewhat a little bit of the same kind of book infatuation that something like Ascendance of a Bookworm has with A Bride Story, or Moggy maybe. Similar fantasy, but Middle Eastern, Central Asian feel to it. So lots of different things going on, but yeah, just a really fun time. And Theo's really likable. A lot of the characters who we meet throughout the series seem really interesting, and I am looking forward to learning more about them. And it's kind of a shame that this takes so long to be released, because it is a monthly series, so it's a slower release, because I want more. I'm just greedy. But yeah, Magus of the Library, be sure to check it out if you haven't. I know that it's because it's been a while since this has been coming out. I'm sure that more people are aware of it now than when it was first being released. But yeah, definitely jump on it if you haven't, if it sounds like something you would enjoy. But yeah, have you read this series? Have you heard of it or not heard of it? Do you like it, dislike it, agree with my opinions, or totally disagree? I don't know. Yeah, let me know. I love reading your comments, as always. You guys know this, and I do try to read and respond to all of them as best as I can. If you're wanting to, and I will always have, or if you're wanting to, my Twitter is in the description below. You can follow me at CollectingG there, where I talk about manga and anime and all things that I'm interested on a quite regular basis. It's also a way to interact with me more directly than rather just through YouTube comments, I think. But yeah. And it also, if you aren't subscribed to the channel but you like my things, please consider doing so, just so you can stay up to date when I post new videos. And I do post at least twice a month. I am trying to get better. I do have more videos in the pipeline, hoping for you guys to see. But yes, yeah. So thank you guys so much for watching. I am Simply G. I will catch you in the next video. Bye till then.